You know, I've been around for a while. I've met some interesting people. Done some crazy things. So you'd think that there wasn't much that could take me by surprise. You'd be wrong. The world is full of stories and science and things that amaze and confound me every single day. Incredible mysteries that keep me awake at night. Some I can answer, and others just defy logic. Armies, war. Humans do crazy things to each other. They always have. The history of mankind is littered with horrific events that have taken the lives of millions, and all for what? September the 11th, 2001 will go down as one of our very darkest days. The day that true terror came to America. Do you remember what you were doing? Like millions of others, I was watching the whole thing on TV, dumbfounded and awestruck at the sheer violence of it all as the towers came down, 110 stories of steel and concrete reduced to rubble in a matter of seconds. My first thought was no one could survive inside that apocalypse. I was wrong. New York City, September the 11th, 2001. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 hits the North Tower of the World Trade Center. In the chaotic minutes after the crash, many inside the building are unaware of what just happened. In his North Tower office, structural engineer Pasquale Bozzelli is on the phone to his wife, trying to get information.
Don't be alarmed. Just turn on the television and tell me what you see. Pasquale, she goes, a plane hit your building. Can you tell me, did it hit low on the building? Did it hit in the middle of the building, or did it hit high? She said it's like it hit pretty high in the building.
His office is on the 64th floor, 30 floors below the impact zone. But Pasquale's relief doesn't last long. Minutes later, a second plane crashes into the South Tower.
When the second plane hit, we knew, just like everyone else, it wasn't just an accident. It's a terrorist attack. And then smoke actually started entering the floor. What should we do?
Pasquale gathers his colleagues to evacuate.
We went out into the hallway and entered the stairway and looked in, and it was clear.
With time running out, the group have no idea what they'll find there. They make slow but steady progress down seemingly endless flights of stairs. Suddenly, the building shudders violently. It's the massive shockwave caused by the collapse of the South Tower. The tremors leave Pasquale and his colleagues terrified. If they're going to survive, they have to move faster. As they reach the 22nd floor, Pasquale hears something terrifying and massive.
I heard this loud noise from above, like a freight train type of loud, like huge safes tumbling through the stairs.
The 110-story North Tower is collapsing above their heads. And they are trapped.
There was no place to run. There was no door there. I was halfway down the stairs. I was getting tossed back and forth.
Pasquale makes a crucial decision.
Instinctively, I just dove right into the corner of the next landing. I curled up in a fetal position right in the corner, and my thought at the time was, if anything's falling, maybe they would hit the wall rather than hit me.
As 500,000 tons of steel and concrete crash down, Pasquale braces himself.
I felt the floor that I was laying on just crack open. The entire building is collapsing. At that split second, I said, oh my God, I can't believe this is how I'm gonna die. I prayed for a quick death, and then I was just free falling.
just 25 seconds, the North Tower of the World Trade Center has been reduced to dust. No one inside could survive. But Pasquale Buselli has defied the odds.
One huge flash, and the next thing I know, I opened up my eyes. I thought I was dead. And I started to cough. I started to feel pain in my leg. That's when I realized I was alive, when I felt pain.
Sitting on top of a 4-story pile of debris, somehow Pasquale Buselli has survived the collapse and a fall of 55 meters with only a broken foot.
And I started to call out help. I was calling out the names of people that were with me. Is anybody around?
Finally, he sees figures moving through the rubble below.
I saw 2 firemen walking, climbing the rubble. And I called out to them. And I said, hey, help. I'm up here.
The firemen are stunned. They can't believe anyone could be alive this high up in the wreckage. They think Pasquale is another rescue worker.
I said, no, I was in the building, it collapsed. And then he got on the radio, goes, we got a civilian, we found a survivor, we got a survivor. He was just there looking at me, just looking up like, how do we get this guy down from there, and trying to figure out a way to because it was basically, I was hanging off a little ledge, and there was just an open pit to them, and then more debris field, and then behind me was a mountain of rubble. And that's it, and there was no way for me to go other than I was between pipe and crushed concrete and metal and twisted metal, and I was sitting on basically just pulverized, almost like a slab, but it was just pulverized concrete. I said, I'm okay, I need a phone. I need to call my wife. She just watched the thing collapse, so I know she thinks, And so I called my wife. I said, Louise, it's me. She's like, oh my God, Pasquale, it's you, oh my God. Well, I said, I just want to let you know I'm okay, and hopefully I'll be home soon.
Almost 3,000 people died on 9/11. Pasquale was one of only 20 survivors found in the rubble.
So I fell 18 floors, which is, to me, amazing. I still can't believe I survived.
How did Pasquale Buselli live through one of the greatest disasters in history, almost unscathed? Was it just pure luck? Or is there some other explanation?
Amazing, isn't it? We all know there are precious few tales of survival from this horrific event, and every one of them is a miracle. But Pasquale Buselli's story seems almost impossible. Not only did he escape the impact and fire, he fell 18 floors and had 500,000 tons of debris come down on top of him, and he comes out virtually unscathed. How did he do it?
Dr. Kerry Ressler is a behavioral expert at Emory University School of Medicine. He believes the way Pasquale instinctively reacted to fear saved his life.
Mr. Buselli's story has all the signs of a classic fear reflex.
The fear reflex is an instinctive response to life-threatening situations. It originates in a primitive part of the brain called the amygdala.
The amygdala is a region in the brain about the size of your thumb. It's inside of the ears, about 3 or 4 centimeters in. And it's really one of the most primitive parts of the brain, but one of the most important for survival. And what we know now from literally many decades of research is that the amygdala is really the switch for fear in the mammalian brain, and it's very similar in mice and in humans and apes and everything in between.
The amygdala works by telling the rest of the brain what it needs to do to get out of danger.
That activation of the amygdala activates a hardwired reflexive circuit that activates a flight response, a fear response, and really a whole host of immediate survival reflexes that have probably allowed us as a species to survive for hundreds of thousands of years.
Dr. Ressler thinks it was this process that caused Pasquale to automatically assume the fetal position as the North Tower came crashing down around him. This instinctive reflex action has its roots in a primitive form of defense.
Well, I know if I'm going to be attacked or something's falling on me, I need to curl up, protect my vital organs, put my spine out. But it happens too quick for any of those thoughts to occur. This reflexive, primitive brain reaction to survival that kept him alive.
Did curling up like an animal help shield Pasquale's body from falling debris? Was he saved by a reflex bred into humans by millions of years of evolution? It's an interesting theory. A man survives impossible odds in the collapse of the World Trade Center on 9/11. One expert believes he was saved by an instinctive fear reflex. But 500,000 tons of concrete and steel poured down on top of him. Why wasn't he crushed? Structural engineer Charles Thornton has worked on some of the world's tallest buildings. Thornton is convinced it was the way the Twin Towers were constructed that saved Pasquale's life. The lower part of the tower was supported by 48 massive steel columns that made up the core of the building.
But 80% of the weight of the building is carried by these huge sticks, these huge core columns.
Thornton thinks when the building collapsed, the columns fell in such a way they acted like a massive steel cage around the stairwell.
If you were going to make it, you would have made it in there, because these columns remain straight, which means that they formed a canopy or a teepee over him. And so all of the debris that was coming down, it was sliding outward, going toward the perimeter buildings.
But if the columns saved Pasquale's life, why didn't they protect the others? Thornton thinks he has the answer. Pasquale instinctively chose the safest place in the stairwell, the corner.
He understood that it was a building that had very, very heavy core columns. He just hunkered down in the core and prayed.
While his friends were crushed, Pasquale was shielded by the massive core columns.
On 9/11, I came up out of the subway on 23rd and 6th, and the earth was standing still. There were no taxis, there were no people that were moving. Everybody was standing. Men were stoic, women were crying. Went into our building, which was 20th Street and 6th Avenue. We had the 8th and the 9th floor. Went up on the roof, went out, climbed out a window, stood on the roof, and with 20 or 30 structural engineers said, this is really horrible, but at least they're not going to fall down. And the first one went down, and we just all looked at each other and said, my God, that's not supposed to happen. He was in his little cocoon or his little teepee. He's just a very lucky guy.
So Pasquale could have been protected from danger from above. But how did he survive a fall of 55 meters with only a broken foot?
There's so many things involved that allowed this man to survive.
J.J. Macro is a Vancouver stunt coordinator. He thinks he knows how Pasquale survived the equivalent of an 18-story fall.
Falling is just another form of a crash.
JJ's convinced the key to surviving any fall is putting on the brakes.
Deceleration is the basic principle that we use for saving ourselves when we're doing a fall. It's also the same one that you use in a car crash. What we're trying to do is not stop in 1 foot when we're going 30 feet to the ground, because the G-forces will be what destroy you. So what we try to do is we try to set it up so that you gradually come to a stop.
So what could have slowed down Pasquale enough to save his life? The answer could lie in air trapped in the floors below him.
If you watch the footage of the buildings collapsing, you see all this air circulating everywhere, and I think it was actually forming a cushion underneath them. As it hit each floor, it just kept forming more and more of that cushion.
To test his theory, JJ has constructed a mock-up to simulate the floors underneath Pasquale. He'll demonstrate by using this fragile structure to break his fall from a height of 3 meters.
What you guys should see is me coming off about 8 feet above it and landing flat on my back on top of these pieces of plywood and riding the whole thing down and being able to get up and walk away without any injuries.
The styrofoam beads will represent the outrush of air from the collapsing tower. JJ walks away without a scratch. He's convinced the same principle saved Pasquale Buselli on 9/11.
Well, it worked. He slowed down enough that he was within a manageable range of G-forces to allow him to survive.
Pasquale Buselli, survived an unimaginable horror with barely a scratch. Was he saved by a primitive instinct? Or did he literally float down on a cushion of air? Weird. Or what? A man is cut in half in a freak train accident and survives.
I just started kind of screaming, oh God, oh God.
You know, the human body is a wonderful thing. It can endure all kinds of punishment. You can shoot it. You can stab it with a knife. Nothing. You can hit it with a baseball bat. See, tough, huh? Well, okay, we're not all like that. Supermen don't really exist, right? Wrong.
June 26, 2006. Truman Duncan is working as a railway switchman in Cleburne, Texas. His job is to help connect the massive cars.
It's very dangerous work. As you can see, the cars are very big. When you're working with heavy equipment like this, your life's on the line.
Truman's connected thousands of cars in his 10-year career. But today, his routine is about to be shattered.
So I was riding on the car, and we was moving down the track to make connection with some other cars. I'm standing up there, ended up falling off the car.
Remarkably, Truman lands on his feet, uninjured. But he now faces his worst nightmare. A 20-ton rail car is rolling towards him. And there's no way to stop it.
I barely had enough time to get like halfway up in the stance, and the knuckle, and that's what connects the two blades together, hit me in the chest. And at that time, I grabbed hold of it, and of course, it was dragging me down the track, obviously. And so I turned around and looked to see how much room I had, how much distance was between me and the car. I started running backwards, fast as I could, and I jumped. Of course, I didn't make it.
Truman is dragged under the oncoming wheel. It rolls over him just below the waist and then pulls his lower body up into the brake mechanism.
And it hit me up high, it hurt. It caused me to kind of raise up, and that's when I grabbed on and held on.
Struck with overwhelming force, Truman's lower body has been partially severed.
And finally, we hit the cars. I just started kind of just screaming, oh God, oh God. I was laying there, and it hit me that I might still have my cell phone.
Truman dials 911. The operator can't believe what she's hearing.
I can't lean over by the rail doors. I need 911. I think I'm cutting through.
Okay.
You need to hurry up now.
And someone got ran over by a rail car?
It was me. And I'm about to pass out.
The operator immediately dispatches help. Almost unconscious with pain, Truman somehow finds the energy to make one more call to his family.
I definitely had my kids to draw on. I'd say it was a big part of me making it through.
But his agony is far from over. With injuries that would kill most human beings, Truman Duncan defies medical logic and survives another 45 minutes until paramedics arrive.
First words out of my mouth when paramedics arrived was morphine. I wanted something, to stop the pain.
Even for the paramedics, it's a scene that defies belief. The race is now on to save his life. Truman is airlifted to a hospital. Waiting for him is emergency specialist Dr. David Smith.
They said, well, we've got a guy that's been run over by a train. And my first thoughts were, well, I'll be going down to declare somebody dead.
But Truman Duncan is still alive.
He was crushed in half. In all the years I've been doing trauma, I've never seen anybody this torn up that I thought could survive. Had he torn his intra-abdominal viscera, his guts, that would have been really bad. That would have been a whole different equation, because then you start dealing with contamination that leads to bad infections. He had plenty of contamination by the time we got done operating on him. The first time, I thought I'd picked out the contents of a gravel yard and a wood yard, as well as a pasture, because there was so much grass, gravel, and wood embedded throughout his entire wounded area, which was huge. And the fact that his chest had also not been injured gave him a much better prognosis, because he would be able to breathe, and we would be able to feed him through his own GI tract. At the first operation, removed all the mutilated tissue, including all of the bone and tissue attached to it. So this and this should look exactly alike. So we removed this much bone from this side. A human pelvis is an exceptionally strong structure. I could take your pelvis, put it up on the floor, jump up and down on it, and not break it. That's how incredibly strong the pelvis is. To do this much damage to a person and have them live is incredible. It's extraordinary.
During the next 6 weeks, he undergoes 22 more operations. Truman's doctors describe his recovery as nothing short of miraculous.
Most of the time, somebody with this injury would never make it to be seen by a physician. He would be dead in the field.
By all means, I should have been dead, you know. But everything happened just right, you know. I survived.
I love my trains. I have pileups all the time. Lucky for me, no one gets hurt. It's all pretend, right? Yeah, but here's this guy. He gets dragged along under a 20-ton railway carriage, is literally cut in two, loses half his blood, and still manages to call 911 and his family for a chat. What kind of a person could do that?
Dr. David Smith has an idea that's heavy duty. Truman's life was saved by the very thing which nearly killed him, the train. When a person suffers major bodily trauma, the biggest threat to life is often through blood loss.
Truman had lost probably at least 50% of his blood volume. That's a fatal bleed.
Why didn't Truman bleed to death? Dr. Smith is certain it's one thing, the massive force of the train's wheels.
He was literally pulled up into the mechanism, which applied a great deal of pressure. The train was like 5 first responders applying direct pressure to a bleeding wound.
Without this improvised tourniquet, Dr. Smith believes Truman would have died.
Had he been thrown free, I'm quite certain that he would have bled to death there very quickly.
Was Truman Duncan's life saved by the train that cut him in half? Or is there another explanation? Dr. Peter Obermark teaches in the paramedic training program at the University of Cincinnati.
When I read the story of Truman Duncan's survival, the first thing that I did was take the story and circulate it around to my paramedic friends and colleagues, because everyone was just simply astonished that it was possible for a human being to suffer that kind of traumatic injury and to lose that much blood and not only survive, but to really survive as a viable, intact human being. And that, to me, is the most incredible part of the story. The human capacity for survival under the most appalling of circumstances.
He claims Truman's life was saved because of what the paramedics didn't do, which was to replace the blood he lost with IV fluids.
If those paramedics had tried to treat him with the conventional resuscitation strategy of pumping him full of fluids to try to reestablish normal blood pressure, he might not be alive.
The reason is that too much fluid can disrupt the body's clotting mechanism, which acts to stop bleeding. It can blow a clot out of a wound or even prevent one from forming.
Not only did it not help control the bleeding, but it actually made the bleeding worse.
Truman Duncan was treated with a newer approach. It's called permissive hypotension. It involves paramedics allowing the patient to have low blood pressure until they can be operated on.
The goal is to keep the blood pressure just high enough so that the brain and the heart and the lungs are getting adequate supplies of oxygen-bearing blood, but not so high that you increase the risk of blowing out a clot.
It's not an easy treatment to perform.
It really involves constantly monitoring the patient's mental status, his vital signs. Essentially, if you let the blood pressure drop too low, you kill your patient.
But the technique seems to improve the odds of survival.
There is still a lot of debates amongst doctors who work in emergency medicine about when and how to apply the concept.
So was Truman's life saved by permissive hypotension? Adventurer and surgeon Dr. Kenneth Kamler says Truman's survival has nothing to do with medicine.
There are patients I've seen, people I've taken care of on the mountain or in the jungle, who literally should have died and didn't. And there's really no medical way to explain it.
Dr. Kamler is convinced some people can survive severe physical trauma just by thinking. Scientists call it the will to live.
This is a subtle survival tool that's within us, but is only brought out in extreme situations. Most of us will go through our entire lives and never know if we have that or not because we never put to the test.
Dr. Kamler also thinks this unique survival tool is heavily motivated by a dedication to a higher cause.
I've seen one factor which is common to all the people who do survive, and that is that they're aware of a goal larger than themselves, such as religious belief, duty to country, a feeling that they need to stay alive for their family. And I think in Truman's case, that's what kept him going.
Did Truman survive by will alone? Dr. Kamler claims the will to live not only exists, but is a biological mechanism of the brain, located in the anterior cingulate gyrus. When charged with electricity, the mechanism shows up as red on a CAT scan. As electricity travels outward, Kamler believes it enables the brain to mobilize resources for survival.
He's thinking, what do I have to do to survive? And this is how he's able to call 911 and save himself. He's actually thinking clearly at this point because the energy generated from this area in the cingulate has been brought forward. This is motivation. This is motivation to survive. And you can see it up in here. It's pretty dull back in here. His heart and lungs are failing. He needs to power these to stay alive. And in fact, the brain prioritizes itself as well. It's giving him his ability to think until he can get rescued. And he did this for 45 minutes, and he got rescued.
For Dr. Kamler, it's a remarkable demonstration of the power of the mind. But do we all have it? Sadly, no.
Some of us have it and some of us don't. And that's what makes the difference between survival or dying.
Did Truman Duncan save himself by sheer force of will? Does he owe his life to a controversial first aid technique? Or did the giant wheels of the train act as a tourniquet of steel? Weird. Or what?
You know, I've spent a lot of time in Africa stalking the big game. And, boy, it's not for the faint-hearted. No. You need nerves of steel, and you have to know your beast like you know yourself, what he's thinking, what he's feeling. Make one mistake, and it could be your last. You only get one shot. There he is. Right. That was intense. These things bug me.
March 9th, 1996. A group of tourists make their way down the Zambezi River in Zimbabwe. Safari guide Paul Templer is leading them with his friend Evans Namazango.
I mean, the scenery there was just beautiful. We were drifting down this little, narrow, jungle-lined channel, and just ahead of us, the mist was rising up above Victoria Falls.
Passing a bend in the river, they come up on a pod of hippos.
They were just sitting there sunning themselves, wallowing in the shallows. And so I started telling them a little bit about hippos. I didn't mention to them the fact that every year in Africa, hippos kill more people than any other animal.
Paul knows from experience to stay well clear of these massive creatures.
The reason I would be particularly wary about a hippopotamus would be that not only do they grow quite large, 15 feet long, about 5 feet tall, and weigh a few tons, a fully grown bull hippo, they're very strong. So if they bite you, typically you don't fare so well. When you see a pod of hippo, over the years I'd learned to read the water, and I knew that if I stuck to shallow water, I'd be pretty safe, give them a wide berth.
But just when he thinks they're clear, Paul hears a disturbance behind him.
I turned just in time to see the canoe flying up and Evans, the paddler, being catapulted out of the canoe.
Something has attacked them and capsized the other canoe. Ignoring his own safety, Paul decides to help his friend.
I leant over to grab a hold of his outstretched hand.
But the real horror is about to begin.
As our fingers almost touched, the water between us just erupted.
Paul and Evans are under attack by a rogue bull hippo.
I just saw the monster charging in towards me. His mouth was wide open as he zeroed in before scoring a direct hit. His huge tusks tearing into my torso as he drove me underwater. I punched and scratched, and nothing I did had any effect. I remember at one point the hippo hurled me up into the air, and I did this crazy sort of half twist before falling back into his mouth. Once I realized that I was up to my waist on the hippo's throat, there was a deep sense of, oh, crikey.
Sensing Paul is weakening, the hippo prepares to finish the kill by drowning its prey.
I remember lying on the bottom of the river, and I was looking up. There I was, pinned inside this hippo's mouth with his tusks boring through me, and just wondering which would happen first, if I'd bleed to death or if I'd drown.
It's neither. Inexplicably, the killer hippo lets Paul go. He floats to the surface, where one of the guides is there to rescue him.
I just lay there, terror and panic threatening to overwhelm me, and pain just coursing through my body by this stage.
But then he remembers his colleague.
I looked around and there was no Evans. Mac, where's Evans? It's gone, mate. It's gone.
Evans is dead, and without medical help, Paul will soon be as well. But by sheer luck, a medical team is conducting a drill on the riverbank.
I made the mistake of taking a look at myself. Ugh, that was a mess. I'd been skewered like a kebab. I had tusks through me all over the place. Everything went calm. I went totally calm, and the pain, it all went away. I can describe the physical and the emotional and the psychological aspects of it, but to me it was so much more than that. To me it was a profoundly spiritual experience, one in which I was infused with the most incredible sense of peace. And with that peace came the realization that this was my moment of choice. Should I go or should I stay?
But Paul now faces a new problem. He has to survive a 6-hour, 400-kilometer drive on rough roads to a hospital. After an agonizing journey, Paul finally arrives. He's alive, but the medical staff aren't sure they can save him. Paul undergoes a 7-hour operation to amputate his left arm and patch up the rest of his mangled body.
I'm told that there were 38 bite marks on me. My one foot had been crushed. A hippo tried to put its tusk through it. I ended up with a punctured lung.
Paul's injuries should have killed him.
I jokingly refer to this incident as my bad day at the office. I have a far deeper sense of gratitude and appreciation for the day-to-day.
In an epic underwater struggle, he fought off a merciless predator that savaged and gored him. Major General Ivan Fenton, a retired officer in the Canadian Army, thinks he knows.
I think the fact that Paul was in the military before he had this horrific attack helped him both physically and psychologically.
Paul Templar served as a gunner in the British Army in the late 1980s. General Fenton thinks this helped him stay calm.
Militaries are often thought of as just military macho toughness. It's psychological, almost spiritual toughness as well. The will, the determination to overcome something terrible, to work through fear, to control yourself so that you will still do your job even though you're terrified.
Paul not only stayed cool, he fought back.
Military training helps you work through a mental process even when you're under huge stress. For example, troops, say a section of people, 9 soldiers, come under attack unexpectedly, an ambush. So they have to, under the guidance, either instinctive guidance as a team or the guidance of the leader, the section commander, where is the fire coming from? How do I get my people out of the range of the bullets right away, like find low ground? And then how do I suppress the fire, and how do I either get beyond it, because we have got to get, our #1 mission is to get beyond it, or how do we go and take out the source of that fire? Paul knows a bit about hippos from his background. As in the military, we're always trying to train people not only to let them know what they might expect, but we're trying to make them be ready to handle the unexpected as well. And so he was able to think of, is there a vulnerable point in this thing? Yes, the snout. Can I find the snout? Yes, start punching at the snout.
Fenton also claims there was another critical factor, Paul's compassion, learned by looking out for his fellow soldiers.
When you're able to focus even a small part of your consciousness on the well-being of somebody else, it helps you avoid being overcome by what's happened to you. So he wasn't thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die. He was, where's Evans? Are my customers all right?
A man lives through a near-fatal attack by a 3-ton hippo. Did his military background help him survive? ER Dr. Chris Martin doesn't think so.
The reason Paul Templar's here today is because his injuries were survivable.
A hippo's jaw can exert a force of over 1,800 pounds per square foot, twice that of a lion and 7 times that of a human. Its 2 lower tusks are 50 centimeters long and razor sharp. They inflicted terrible damage on Paul's body.
What Paul suffered in the field was a sucking or open pneumothorax. And the sucking comes from the fact that when you take a deep breath, you hear the sucking noise as air gets sucked through a bloody wound in and out of the chest. Because the chest wall is only this thick, and your trachea, or the tube that connects your mouth to your lungs, is this thick, or this long, that air will preferentially go in and out of this hole as opposed to going in and out of your lungs. So with each breath, air gets sucked in the bloody wound and out, and it bubbles. And so the sucking noise is why it's called a sucking chest wound.
Wounds like this would normally be fatal.
When people survive what should be unsurvivable injuries, I believe most of it comes down to luck. Had that injury hit his major vessels, his heart, had damaged the lung further, he would have died.
Why were Paul's vital organs intact? Incredibly, Dr. Martin thinks it's due to a unique feature in hippo design, the shape of its massive tusks.
So instead of the tusk going directly in and hitting a large vessel, lacerating the lungs severely, or even hitting the heart, it curved up into his chest and limited the amount of damage underneath.
Paul also had another potentially fatal wound, a severed artery under his arm. But Martin claims this too was survivable because of the way the tusk penetrated his body.
Had it not been so cleanly cut that it stopped bleeding basically immediately, he would have bled to death in the Zambezi River.
It's incredible. I mean, it's awful about poor Paul's injuries and everything. But he survived, right? And the big news here is we may have a new breakthrough in medical science. Hippo tusks could revolutionize the way we do surgery. Just imagine savings on hardware. So let's try it. Here we have a body. Well, it's a watermelon, representing a human body anyway. And if it's true, this tusk should be able to perform accurate clinical surgical cuts far better than any scalpels. Okay, maybe that's a blunt one. We'll try this. Oh dear. No, let's go again. I guess there's some teething problems, maybe.
Paul Templer survived what should have been fatal wounds from the hippo. But how did he manage to avoid drowning?
Paul instinctively would have known to hold his breath when he was underwater.
Western Ontario head swim coach Paul Midgley might have the answer. He points to an experience in Templer's past that made him able to survive a near-drowning experience. Paul Templer had been an aquatic athlete. Midgley thinks this gave him an immense advantage.
Swimmers spend 20-plus hours a week in the water. You're going to be very comfortable in the water. Paul was obviously able to keep calm and controlled through his ordeal.
I think I first swam competitively when I was about 5 and did so all the way through my teens. And I both enjoyed it, and I also played water polo competitively. I love to be in the water, on the water, underwater, anything to do with the water.
Midgley thinks aquatic training gave Templer a critical skill, the ability to time his breathing.
Paul instinctively would have known to hold his breath when he was underwater and to take advantage of those brief moments above water to fill his lungs for the next submersion.
But Paul was underwater for almost 4 minutes. How could he hold his breath so long?
Paul's competitive background would allow him to utilize less oxygen while fighting the hippo than a normal, untrained swimmer.
Did aquatic training give Paul Templer the edge he needed to survive the hippo attack? To check his theory, Coach Midgley has set up a test. An Olympic swimmer will compete against an untrained control subject to complete as many underwater laps as they can.
The test we're going to do is going to be a controlled test, an example of the type of hypoxic training we do for competitive swimmers. We're going to do some widths of the pool underwater kick. We'll allow the swimmers to take a breath when they reach the other side.
The goal? To see how much aquatic sports training can increase the ability to stay underwater.
Ready? Nope.
The Olympic swimmer pulls ahead almost immediately.
Just see how efficient Joe is in the water.
The control subject is already running into difficulty.
It's really feeling it already, just after one whip.
The control subject falls further and further behind until he finally gives up.
I thought I could do it, but my lungs were giving out.
Joe is still going strong.
He could pretty much do these all day.
The result is clear. The Olympic swimmer has a huge advantage in staying underwater.
Definitely proves our point. As you can see, a competitive swimmer would handle the hypoxic aspect and definitely a lot more comfortable in the water than the non-swimmer.
So is Paul's background as an aquatic athlete the key to his survival on that March afternoon? Did it give him lungs of iron that even a hippo couldn't kill? We may never know. Weird or what? Join me next time for more stories that will undoubtedly be weird or what?